In this video, I'm going to focus on what I consider to be the most underappreciated of all the poetic devices, line breaks. Let's jump right into it. So I want to start with this silly little cartoon here, and the musicians watching this will understand it, or I'm not really a musician and I understand it. So anyone who's vaguely familiar with rests in music will understand it. And the reason I start with this cartoon is that poetry is, as Kenneth Cook says, like music, and line breaks are where we take the rests. Now, obviously, certain punctuation dictates a longer rest, but even a line that doesn't end in any punctuation gives us a little bit of a pause. I mean, your eye has to jump from that line down to the next one, so of course there's a bit of a pause. And poets are using those pauses very, very intentionally. So why do we use line breaks? In prose, line breaks are only used to move from one line to the next. Like this, like this, like this, sort of like this, also like this. Do you get the point yet? Wait for it. Up there it is. Right? When you're writing in prose, you just run out of space, so you have to move. Otherwise, if you read The Great Gatsby, you'd have to walk like 3 miles if it was all written out in one long line. In poetry, though, the line breaks are intentional. They're used so that the reader has to stop and take notice. You can't have meter without line breaks. You can't have music without line breaks. Thus, one becomes more conscious of the words. For example, one becomes more conscious of the words. Da-da-dum, da-dum-da, da-da-dum. Again, I'm taking this from Kenneth Cook. Read Making Your Own Days if you get a chance. Fantastic book. So what he does in this example is he takes a normal sentence that he had written, one becomes more conscious of the words, and he turns it into a sort of poem. One becomes more conscious of the words. And because you pause at those different line breaks, you start to listen to the words in a way that you wouldn't if you were just reading them in a prose setting or a normal sentence. This is what separates a poem from a grocery list. You have to have meaning and you have to have music. A grocery list has plenty of meaning. It's what you're going to get when you go to a store, but it doesn't have music. Unless, of course, a poet is writing a grocery list, because William Carlos Williams kind of does a grocery list-esque poem in the Frozen Plums one. What is that called? This Is Just to Say, where it's just talking about, sorry, I ate these frozen plums, but with line breaks, you get a little bit of music there. So anyway, more on William Carlos Williams later. For now, let's talk about some of the terms with line breaks. One you're probably familiar with is a stanza. This is a large line break used to create a separation in the poem even greater than just a normal line break, thus a stanza. So the following poem has how many stanzas? This is Stephen Crane here. A man said to the universe, "Sir, I exist." However, replied the universe, "the fact has not created in me a sense of obligation." There's a bit of 2020 to that poem, if you ask me. How many stanzas in that poem? Just one. It could look like there's more if you're unsure of like how far apart those are with the formatting, but the point being is if there's more than one stanza, it'll be clear. Even though you have 2 speakers in this poem, it's only in one stanza. So what about this poem here? We've talked about this one before in comparisons. Oh, my Louvre is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. Oh, my Louvre is like the melody that's sweetly played in tune. So fair art thou, my bonny lass, so deep in Louvre am I, and I will Louvre thee still, my dear, till the seas gang dry. Robert Burns there. So this poem has 2 stanzas. Okay, so you might be wondering, what's the big deal with stanzas? What does it matter if there's 1 stanza or 2 stanzas or 10 stanzas or whatever it might be? Well, the great thing about stanzas is poets think about them. Some poets might say, I just kind of throw them around, but I'd be willing to bet that the majority of poets would say they put a lot of intentional thought and experimentation into whether or not their poem is going to be a single stanza or multiple stanzas or whatever it might be. Even poems that are traditionally just 1 stanza, like a sonnet, are sometimes broken into 2. I'm looking at you, Edna St. Vincent Millay. So if we know that poets use stanzas and line breaks as well intentionally, then we can reverse engineer them to try and figure out something to write about in the poem. Let's take this poem right here. Now, this isn't the complete poem, it's just the first 2 stanzas, but look at the first stanza of the poem, those first 4 lines. Go ahead and pause the video if you need to, read it through again. Okay, so what is that stanza about? Love, right? Now read stanza 2 again. Try and figure out what the subject of this stanza is. Well, it's the object of the speaker's love, the bonny lass. Stanza 2 specifies what the love is about. Stanza 2 could be about pizza, if Robert Burns knew what pizza was. I'm not sure if he did. Maybe some variation of it, not what we're thinking of. It could have been about haggis. I'm Scottish heritage, so I'm trying not to make fun of them when I say that. Haggis is very interesting. I've had it before when I went to Scotland. But anyway, stanza 2 could be about anything. It narrows the poem, so you can kind of draw a shape to the poem. It starts out wide, it's about love, which is very general, could be about anything, and then it narrows to the object of that love, the bonny lass. Other poems might work differently. They might start with a very specific object and then widen out to a larger theoretical concept. So sometimes you can think of stanzas as like the way a camera might operate in a movie. Sometimes a director wants you to see a very small object and then zoom out for you to get a bigger picture. Or other times a director might want you to see the big picture and zoom in on something very interesting. Or the camera might just pan or tilt a little bit. There's many different ways that a camera can be used in a movie, just as there's many different ways that a poet can use stanzas and line breaks. But that's one thing to think about if you have to write about a poem. Why are there more than one stanza or a single stanza? And how can you reverse engineer that to try and figure out something about the poem? So how do you write line breaks in a paper? Well, this is MLA format. It might be a little different for other formats. I'm not as up on the various formats anymore now that I've been out of college for a while, and they change a bit. But anyway, if we go back to our Kenneth Cook poem there, one becomes more conscious of the words. You have one becomes slash more conscious slash of the words, or backslash, and then 1 through 3. The 1 through 3 would be the line numbers, and the backslashes are where the line breaks happen. Now, in MLA format, if you are citing more than 4 lines or quoting more than 4 lines, then you're going to use a block quote. But that's a little more complicated than what I want to get into in this video here. My point is if you're writing about poetry, you need to make clear to your readers that you are quoting verse and not prose. And I think that goes to show that rule, and when we write about it, goes to show just how important line breaks are. The distinction between something being written in verse as opposed to it being written in prose totally changes the way we look at it in some instances. Okay, so can you create a poem with just line breaks? Earlier I talked about grocery lists, and I brought up old William Carlos Williams there, fantastic poet. And William Carlos Williams was really into stripping poems down to their bare images. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, no, you have to have some music in there, or you have to have some metaphor or something like that. Well, yeah, but that can all be driven by the line breaks. The line break can actually be the star of your poem. And a famous example of this would be William Carlos Williams' The Red Wheelbarrow. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. For a really short poem, 16 words, you have 4 stanzas and 8 line breaks. So there's a real intentional nature, and just the way it appears on the page is so interesting, right? It's almost like a piece of art just in the shape of the poem, let alone what the line breaks do for it. I have a whole video on The Red Wheelbarrow. It was one of my least favorite poems for my time in high school, and now it is, I would say, in my top 3 poems. I don't know if I could tell you my top 3 poems, but I can guarantee you that The Red Wheelbarrow would be in there. I love that poem so much. So I have a whole video on it if you want to check that out. Otherwise, if you're just here for line breaks, this is a great poem to think about on how to use line breaks exceptionally well. Okay, one more fun example. This one from pop culture here. This is a little dated, but I'm a little old, so bear with me. So there's this band called Paramore that I was really into in high school. Me and my friends listened to them a lot, and they have this song called Miracle. And I'm not going to play the song for you because I'm really looking forward to the 12 cents I'm going to make on YouTube with this being monetized. So I'm just going to read it for you here. So this part of the song goes, "Now I've gone for too long living like I'm not alive, so I'm going to start over tonight, beginning with you, and I don't want to run from anything, blah, blah, blah." The reason why I'm showing you this song from my early youth is because I think it does something really interesting with line breaks. Poets do this too, but I think you can hear it easier in music because you get the advantage of the vocalist's emphasis on different words as they're pronouncing or enunciating them as they sing here. So the word that I'm really interested in this example is you at the end of the second line. So the sentence goes, so I'm going to start over tonight beginning with you. And there's a line break, which leads us, if you're listening to the song, you can hear it too, leads you to think that's the whole thought. But then you kind of pivots down and launches you into the next line, you and I. And then the I kind of doubles up, don't want to run. So instead of, this is, say whatever you will about Paramore and make fun of the music I listened to in my youth, but this is actually really impressive. You have these words doubling up in their meaning, and the line break really facilitates this. So again, just in case I'm not making myself clear here, so I'm going to start over tonight beginning with you and I, or it could be I'm going to start over tonight beginning with you, and I don't want to run. So you have these words, you and I, doubling up, and there's some sort of uncertainty about it, but there's also this excitement, and it's just really clever. And I'm probably done with Poetic Devices videos for a little while here because I have what I need for my curriculum. But I'd like to come back and make some more in the future, because when you study Poetic Devices, you will just drive yourself crazy. You look at these last 4 videos when you're listening to your music, or when you're in the breakfast aisle, or when you're trying to think of a unique way to compare two objects. You see poetry all around you, or elements of poetry all around you. And I think that's fantastic. And like I said, it might drive you a little crazy, but it's a fun way to observe the world from time to time. So thank you so much for watching these videos. If you have any questions or comments or examples of line breaks that you really love, please leave them down below, and happy reading. We'll see you around.